This is such a treat for me because this is truly one of my favorite series of this year. I fell in love with this show right off the bat. And I mean, it's hilarious, it's fun, but it's also important. It's needed. It's just, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for
no. It's gonna be a love fest. That's how I get just like a love fest. A huge part of the series is destigmatizing and eliminating shame around female pleasure and intimacy. I would love to hear, again, if y'all are comfortable, what has been your experiences learning about female pleasure from film and television in the past? And then in turn, why is it then so important for a show like this to exist for viewers of all ages? Because when we see it, we can do it, we can be it.
I can go first. I mean, I think that I grew up watching 80s and 90s movies that were all incredibly male gazy and where, you know, sex as date rape was normalized. You know, I just watched 16 Candles with my son, and I had to explain, like, that's not okay anymore.
I watched that recently. I watched that recently and was shocked. I was like,
it's like,
oh my God.
They feel like, yes, it's like the most racist, you know, rapey movie, but it was completely normalized at the time. So it's like, you can't even judge the filmmakers for it because they were responding to the period. And so I think I grew up with all sorts of messages like that. I mean, I don't think I saw a discussion of female sexuality on TV until the Vibrator episode of Sex and the City. It was probably
just about to say that.
Yeah, that was probably the first time I even knew that existed. And I think it is a really important conversation to have, because I think that as women, we're kind of taught about preventing pregnancy and, you know, the dangers of sexuality, and no one is talking about pleasure. And, you know, we had this discussion in the writer's room when I was writing that Vibrator episode, the masturbation conversation between Joyce and Shelley, and the men in the room were like, why is it a big deal for somebody to tell their sister that they masturbate? And I'm like, women don't have that conversation. I've never had that conversation with somebody in my life, and it's just not normalized. It's not discussed. So it felt like a good opportunity just to, you know, have some honesty, but also, you know, just normalize things that should be normalized.
It seems completely crazy to me that it's not discussed more. But that's exactly. I remember watching the Sex and the City episode where Miranda has got her vibrator in her drawer, and Magda, her housekeeper, keeps like hiding it and replacing it with statues of the Virgin Mary, and Miranda's just like, this is fine. I masturbate. This is my vibrator. Leave it alone. Like, and she's completely owning it. And I was just like, I've never seen this before, and this is fantastic. And I remember my friends and I, in kind of a quite front-footed way, would sort of quite boldly speak about masturbation in a way that was sort of to kind of get conversations going in class. I mean, like when we were doing feminist studies at university, we would speak about it in a way because we knew it was not something you spoke about. So we kind of even posit questions that we didn't necessarily agree with, but just to get the comment, make the point that, why does this shock you? Why are you uncomfortable with this? And I just remember not seeing it on telly until then. And then so having it discussed in Minx, and then when Joyce gets really uncomfortable around her sister talking about it, you just think, that's still happening. And the fact that the men in the room kind of said, oh, why is this such a big deal? It's just because men just speak about it so openly. I don't think women I don't think they're even aware of how they're not talking about it. It's just, I mean, women, for God's sake, they still, if they have to go to the bathroom to change their tampon, they still slip it up their sleeve and kind of surreptitiously sneak into the bathroom. It's just like, carry that thing like a baton and walk to the bathroom. Like, make a point of it. It's like, why are we hiding this? Like, we all know this happens. We know we menstruate. Why are we hiding it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say all of my exposure and experience came from like word of mouth conversation with friends. And what was funny about it wasn't even about masturbation as much as it was about the orgasm, the female orgasm. It was like, you know, have you orgasmed yet? Kind of a thing. And then when, you know, it's like, well, no, I don't know, you know, and then be like, you'll know, you know, and so that was the common, like, you will know when you have. And so it was things that I just didn't really see on television at all talked about, except for, like you said, Sex and the City. And even then it felt like, I didn't think of it like, oh wow, they're doing this groundbreaking thing of talking about it. I've never seen it. It was just like illuminating. I was just like fully invested in learning about this thing through these women and through this conversation, because even amongst ourselves, when we would talk about it, we weren't talking about it that way necessarily. So yeah, I mean, I love that Minx does that. And it's shocking that in 2022, that's even still a revelation, but you know.
Well, I mean, like, how many sex scenes have we all seen where like they have just like penetrative sex for 30 seconds and everyone has an orgasm? That's why in the episode where Joyce has sex with the centerfold, he goes down on her, you know, and that's the whole scene. The scene ends. Like, that's all she needs.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. It's like imperative that we see these representations on screen. Like, I'm still like, and I talk about this all the time, that, you know, I'm in my mid 30s and I still have, even though like I have a supportive husband who doesn't ever make me feel ashamed of anything. I feel like we're very open with each other. There's the internal shame just from seeing like countless, you know, scenes, sex scenes, intimacy scenes, the lack of female pleasure scenes from on screen. It's embedded in you. And it takes kind of years and years and work to sort of start peeling back all of that.
It's even down to things where you're exactly right. It's kind of deep habit forming. You know, you have to kind of conscientiously interrupt that unconscious habit. You know, for example, this is slightly off topic, but you know, say you're on set, you have to go to a medic because you've got period pain, and you have to go and ask for ibuprofen. They're like, oh, what is it for? I would always go, oh, I have a headache. And now, you know, obviously now because I have period pain, like, oh,
exactly.
It's preposterous. But even things like that, I remember even when I wasn't quite, I'm talking years ago, when I wasn't quite at a place of comfortably speaking, I was like, no, you have to, because until people start speaking about this publicly and de-shaming it, then nothing's going to change. And I know that's just a small, tiny thing, but it's, you know, there's umpteen little habits like that you can interrupt and reform to get rid of that internal shame, that internal habit. And yeah, I hope that Minx will kind of go, see, it's fine.
But I also think what's so beautiful about the show, and also which adds so much to the humor, like with the Shelley character, is that there's this kind of vulnerability that you know, that comes from the dialogue. It's not like, it isn't as so blatant as, you know, masturbation's great. It's like, well, let's actually dive into it. Let's get into the thick of it. Let's laugh along the way. Let's cry a little. And I think too, what I love so much about the show, which was surprising, is you have this Joyce character who is, you know, presents herself, she's a feminist, she's, you know, very well read, but then she does get a little shy when it comes to talking about female pleasure. And I think, you know, Ellen, you've created these specifically these female characters that do not fit in one box. They are constantly changing, they're constantly growing, they're constantly discovering. And I think that we see that with Joyce and with you know, with Tina. Can you all talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I think that goes back to the conception of the characters. And, you know, I think for me, you know, our point of view into the story is Joyce, and Joyce thinking things are one thing and then them being something else. And I felt like the trick in terms of creating all the characters was to do that same thing to the audience, where, you know, you thought it was going to be a certain way. So you took something that was like a bit of a trope and then you twisted it. And I think, you know, as you pointed out, Shelley is a good example. Like, you assume, because you've seen this movie a million times before, you've seen this character before, that the housewife is going to be like, how could you do this? Don't go into porn. You know, like, you're bringing shame to your family. And then it's like, no, she's the one who's the most curious about it. Like, you know, you think the Black secretary is going to be like the sassy sidekick. You know, that's the expectation. And then as you get into the show, you're like, oh, she's running the whole company. And I didn't realize, like, you know, and so it's like almost testing your own expectations as a viewer.
That was the biggest thing I got out of it, actually, was watching, like, once it was released into the world, was seeing how much it challenged people to recognize the biases that they were walking around with, that they didn't even know they were walking around. You know, like the expectations they had of the character and the shock they felt of being like, wow, she wasn't like that at all. And that makes me wonder why I was expecting her to be, you know?
Yeah, that is, I think with Shelley in particular, when she's kind of saying, you know, yeah, I masturbate and I use, you know, use these toys, as she calls them, the fact that people were surprised by that, I think they would have been, I certainly spoken to a couple of people who were, it was really interesting. They expressed how they were surprised by their surprise, and they didn't realize that they held that kind of, that unconscious bias. And they're like, God, I did feel really bad that I kind of assumed she'd be all priggish and judgy, and that's clearly because of the kind of information that we've received from the way these women are represented on television in the past. And it was interesting that people's own biases being revealed to themselves.
Yeah, nobody should feel bad. It's not our fault. We've been programmed by media, and
exactly.
And I think part of the trick is, like, when you're watching old entertainment, I think part of the trick is to notice how you are being programmed. And it's like, why is every villain of color?
Exactly.
You know, like, why is, you know, every wife a shrew? Like, who made that?
Breaking the rules, unlearning. I mean, and I think also creating a space where, as an audience member, you're like, you can sort of start to reflect in your own life and say, you know, like you're saying, it challenges you as an audience. And I think that I always say that the best stories educate and create empathy. And I think that's what this show does so beautifully. And oh gosh, I love it so much. I was also thinking too about how, I mean, you know, it's kind of obvious how not much has unfortunately progressed since the 70s. We're still fighting over our rights. Our women are still put in the prude or the slut box. You know, how do y'all think that looking into our past, like with a series like Minx, can help us see our present with new perspectives, challenging us to kind of light a fire under us in a sense?
I mean, to be honest, I've spent a lot of time in the 70s mentally. It kind of makes me feel better, because I do think things are cyclical, and I don't feel like we're going to be trapped in this dystopian hellscape forever. I just think it's interesting to see how we, as like the world, are so reactive and so easily manipulated. You know, I started writing this when Donald Trump was still in office, and it was just amazing, the parallels to me. It was like Kennedy was in office and he, you know, did so much for civil rights, and people started to freak out. And Nixon played into the racism of the country and was like, basically ran on like, make America great again. I mean, it was called almost that, you know, it was like really like targeting people's like fear. And it felt like, oh my God, we're in this period again. But the thing is, like, we can also get out of it. And it felt like, you know, you can change, you know, the kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? The tenor of the conversation. And so it does, I guess it makes me feel better. I mean, I'm terrified of this country right now, frankly.
Yeah. Ellen, you said something last night at the panel where you said, in the second season of Minx, the women will have more rights than the women do currently in America.
Oh, wow.
What?
Yeah, 73. Yeah, Roe v. Wade is decided in January.
I just find that, I'm just very frightening.
It is. Yeah, especially like I remember, I think in sixth grade, I had my sixth grade social studies teacher was like, this is why history is important, because it teaches you what not to do, you know, in the future. And know that everyone sees it that way, but I do think that that's what a show like Minx could do, you know, is to show you what was done before that, you know, people allowed that you're not allowing today, and you think that you've progressed, and what happened before that you can learn from.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been so lovely. I love to end on this question. What has being part of the Minx world, playing these characters, creating this show, what have you, taught you most about yourselves?
You guys go. This is hard.
Challenge.
I think for myself, I would say that I was challenged to consider, the conversation that Shelley had with Joyce about how she pleasures herself or how she sees pleasure. I was challenged to consider reconsider what I even considered feminism, or what that means, right? Because I feel like it's always, all of my life, feminism has been sort of presented to me as like this push to free ourselves from the shackles of like a male dominated society in all these different ways, right? And so, a woman getting really sexy and being, nude or whatever is considered like, whatever, let her be free, do what she wants to do. And I think that felt like this push, even when it came to dating. It was like, yes, you should date a lot with a lot of people and be sexually fluid and free. And it felt like, okay, I had to sort of like propel myself into these spaces, as a woman. And this show really helped me explore the idea of like, it's not really about that as much as it's just about being able to just exist and be whatever you are, wherever you fall on the scale of things, that you get to just exist and be, I feel like this show really, in a really sort of subversive way, deals with that, by not only portraying women that are a full gamut of what womanhood could be, but also in the conversations like that one that Shelley was having, where it was like, you have this array of sex toys, which of them would you want to play with, would make you then have to consider like, well, who am I sexually? Like, what does that really mean? And how much have I even spent time defining that or not? That for me, it was the first time I had to really look at it and say, I don't think I've ever asked myself those questions or really defined myself in that way,
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing.
That's a great answer. I everything that Idara just said, I completely agree with. And furthermore, I feel that the way that Minx discusses the power to look,
Yes.
I think that's something that I have definitely engaged with more. You just kind of don't realize that you kind of, without noticing, you kind of put parameters around things, and then Minx going to go like take up space and look, and don't be, and if you're looking, I'm not speaking personally, but if you're looking and someone catches you, don't kind of look away, just kind of continue. Look, I don't mean that literally. I mean, it's okay to look and to explore. Like Idara is saying, it's not feminism. It doesn't look like and sound like one thing. If it means it's kind of just reminded me of how robust that can be. And in the fight for things, what's going on at the moment in America in terms of women's rights, it's very easy to get kind of completely obsessed with one area of feminism, but kind of to remember that it covers so much ground.
Yeah.
And
and really challenging the pleasure thing, like even at the bar, being like, well, what are you into? So do you really like that? Or the conversations, that we had in the meeting before the bar with her, where it was like, well, what actually gives you pleasure, And the feminists that you wound up being in a meeting with and seeing like, they're not having fun. So what are we really, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so
It also taught me that I don't like polyester. Just to make
It doesn't wrinkle. It's a good fabric. It doesn't wrinkle.
It doesn't wrinkle, but
hard to breathe in. But yeah, hearing you speak, I'm thinking also about sort of Joyce's, like what Joyce goes through in the series, and sort of the discovery she goes on in this idea of what feminism means. And I think she still she's allowing herself, and I'm thinking we're going to see more of this in season 2 of what that actually means to her. And which is really fascinating. This all really reminds me of this fantastic book I'm reading. What is it called? A Very Nice Girl. Have you all heard of this book?
No.
So Ellen, what about you? What has creating this beautiful, complex, hilarious, wonderful series taught you most about yourself?
I mean, I think it taught me that I'm capable of doing it. I think that, I went into this with the intention of trying to not run this show like a man. And I think we have a largely female, mostly female department heads or people with female energy. I just think that, I learned that there's a different way to put together a group of people and have something that is an easy place to work, that is collaborative, that's not contentious, but that results in quality entertainment. I think we've all been like poisoned by this auteur theory where it will have to be difficult. And I don't think it has to be like that. So it was
the best set ever.
It was a good set.
Yeah, I mean that's so lovely to hear. And I think it's I think too audiences can sense the bullshit. Like I think that now like we can or the more I talk to folks about, the product that I see when it feels so authentic and genuine, I hear that they had an equally as good experience behind the scenes. And I'm hearing more and more of that. And and I think hopefully this becomes the norm, creating a safe space, creating a space that is void of assholes and void of bullshit, because God, I mean, y'all got to keep creating art, and we can do it the best in the best spaces. So
yeah, absolutely.
Was that. Well, y'all are so lovely. Thank you so much for today. Oh my gosh, I'm giving you virtual hugs. I really appreciate your time, your honesty, your openness. And I can't wait for season 2.